We have a complex system of PVC ducts in our workshop, and everyone who sees it asks me the same thing. Did you ground it? Every woodworker has heard horror stories about exploding dust collectors, and if you've ever felt a little static on a PVC duct, you imagine the whole thing going up in flames. So any discussion turns into a debate, and it's just easier to ground my ducts so I can just say yes and avoid the debate altogether. That's what you see going on here. We got some inexpensive 18-gauge bare copper wire off Amazon. I'll put a link below so you can find it. And we're driving some short screws into the pipe, just far enough to pierce through a little bit. Use one screw every foot or so, alternating from one side to the other. The wire connects them with a single wrap around each head. There's no need to spiral the wire all the way around the duct. PVC is an insulator. The static electricity is really just going to pass through the screw heads into the wire instead of directly through the walls into the wire. Run wire all the way to each machine. If you really want to ground everything really well, you can attach the wire to the flex hose that goes to the machine as well. I didn't bother with that. Once all that nasty static dissipates out of the ducts and into the wire, where does it go? Back to the dust collector, where the end of your line is connected to the blower housing. The housing is connected to the motor, which is connected to your electrical system, which is connected to your house or building's ground. This is a fair amount of work, but it's not that expensive and you should do it. Why? Because you can get a little electric shock from your ungrounded PVC ducts, and that can be annoying. And theoretically, it could be dangerous if it startles you while you're using a power tool. So by all means, ground your ductwork. But it's not going to save you from a fire or an explosion or from Bigfoot or from a good probing on a flying saucer. As you might have guessed, I'm not a big believer in the woodworking dust explosion craze. And while I am a little weary of the endless debates on message boards, I do owe it to my audience to address this issue once and for all. So why am I not a believer? Because not only have I never met anyone who actually experienced it, I've never met anyone who's ever met anyone who's ever met anyone who has firsthand knowledge of a verifiable case. And I don't think you have either. Someone may have told you about someone who heard that someone knew someone that may have had an incident, but that's not a verifiable case. What do I mean by verifiable? Well, they keep records on that sort of thing. Ask your local fire inspector if he'll look it up for you. Rod Cole, who's an MIT scientist with degrees in math and physics, not to mention he specializes in weather research, so he knows a bit about static electricity, he actually did look into it quite a bit. No recorded cases that he could find. Neither could the fire officials he knew of. Neither could he find a confirmed case on all the message board debates online. No photos, no news stories, and believe me, a dust explosion in Grandpa's garage, that'd make the news. Does this lack of verifiable cases mean none exist? Of course not. But he wasn't surprised he couldn't find anything more than anecdotal evidence because he knows a great deal about the science behind it. So several years ago, he wrote an extensive paper on the subject, which once appeared in Fine Woodworking magazine, and it's available online. I'll link to it below. It turns out your PVC ductwork is not a grain elevator. There is not and has never been a thick cloud of dust filling the insides of your ducts. Dust travels through ducts in a stream. I know this because my Clearview Cyclone lets me see it coming out of the duct. A stream of dust rushing through a duct is not going to ignite. You need a specific type of dust cloud to cause an explosion. To create the right conditions for ignition, Dr. Cole calculated that a small dust collector pulling about 250 cubic feet per minute would need to generate 3/4 of a pound of fine dust every minute. Not the wood chips that come from your table saw or your planer, fine dust, like from a sander. If you're generating 3/4 of a pound of sanding dust every minute, you're using big industrial belt sanders. And if you're using big industrial belt sanders, you're not using a 250 cubic feet per minute dust collector. You're using one that moves a lot more air through bigger ducts. Greater airflow and bigger ducts require a lot more dust to create the right cloud density to ignite. Now we're talking pounds of it every minute. It becomes all but mathematically impossible. And even if you could create the right dust cloud in your ducts, you couldn't create a large enough spark to ignite it. PVC is an insulator. Electricity passes through an insulator very slowly. When you touch it, on the outside, you're not grounding all the static buildup from the whole system like you would if it's metal. You're just sucking off a bit from the area of the spark. Because of this, you can't generate a large spark of PVC, certainly not large enough to ignite the dust inside. Granted, this is an oversimplification of how static works, but Dr. Cole's paper explains it better than I can. They actually test these things in labs, mostly for farming and other industries. Without the perfect set of circumstances, it's surprisingly difficult to get a dust cloud to ignite, even in a lab. And those circumstances simply do not exist in the PVC of a small shop dust collection system. Now, we can debate this all day, but none of us are scientists. Dr. Cole, he's a scientist, so just read his paper. Does this mean you shouldn't ground your ductwork? No. As I said, it'll protect you from those annoying little shocks, so why not do it? But if you're laying awake at night worrying about your ducts melting down like 3 Mile Island, don't. Instead, you should be worrying about the real danger, like a screw getting sucked up and then hitting the steel impeller and leaving a smoldering ember in your dustbin. That can start a fire, which is why all dustbins should be metal. What's yours made out of? Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.